The lonesome silhouette of a man knelt motionless against the amber glow of sunset, his weathered Stetson clutched in calloused hands as the prairie wind whispered through the tall grass surrounding his wife's simple wooden cross. Quinn Yates hadn't spoken more than 10 words in the month since he'd buried her, the silence between him and the world growing wider with each passing day. The year was 1878, and Silvercreek, Colorado was still young enough that most graves in the hillside cemetery had fresh dirt. Martha Yates' plot was marked by nothing more than the cross Quinn had fashioned himself, and a small gathering of wildflowers that struggled against the coming autumn chill. Quinn came every evening before dusk, speaking to Martha in whispers too quiet for even God to hear. This evening was different. The sound of approaching footsteps barely registered until they stopped just behind him. Quinn didn't turn. Visitors to the cemetery knew to leave a grieving man to his peace. "Excuse me," came a soft voice, gentle as creek water over smooth stones. "I didn't mean to intrude." Quinn remained silent, his eyes fixed on Martha's name carved into the wood. A woman stepped into his peripheral vision, kneeling beside him with careful movements. In her hands, she carried a modest bouquet of blue columbines and yellow paintbrush flowers, bound with a simple twine ribbon. Without a word, she placed them at the base of the cross, her fingers lingering for a moment on the freshly turned earth. "I didn't know her," the woman said quietly, "but I thought everyone deserved flowers." Quinn's throat worked as he swallowed hard. The first words he'd spoken to anyone besides the barkeep in weeks came out rough and unpracticed. "Much obliged, madam." The woman nodded, but instead of leaving, she settled beside him, arranging her skirts as she sat on the ground, apparently unconcerned with the dirt that would surely stain the fabric. She was dressed simply but neatly in a blue calico dress, her honey-brown hair tucked beneath a modest bonnet. Not the finery of a city woman, but not the rough garments of a farm wife either. Minutes passed in silence, the sun sinking lower behind the mountains, painting the cemetery in lengthening shadows. Quinn expected her to leave, but she remained, her head slightly bowed as if in prayer or contemplation. "You don't have to stay, madam," Quinn finally said, his voice still rough. "I know," she replied simply. "My name is Hannah Mercer. I arrived on yesterday's stage from Denver." Quinn nodded slightly. "Quinn Yates." "It's good to meet you, Mr. Yates, though I wish it were under different circumstances." Quinn's fingers tightened around his hat. Martha wasn't but 32, fever took her quick. Hannah nodded, her eyes showing a depth of understanding that surprised him. "My husband passed last year. Pneumonia." The admission hung in the air between them, a shared grief that needed no further explanation. As darkness began to fall in earnest, Hannah rose to her feet, brushing the dirt from her skirts. "I'll be on my way, Mr. Yates. I hope you don't mind if I come again sometime." Quinn looked up at her for the first time, really seeing her face the kind eyes, the gentle lines at their corners that spoke of both smiles and sorrows. She wasn't a young girl, perhaps in her late 20s, with a quiet dignity about her. "I reckon Martha would appreciate the flowers," he said finally. "Good evening, Mrs. Mercer." As Hannah walked away, Quinn remained by the grave until the first stars appeared overhead. Only then did he place his hat back on his head and make the solitary walk back to a cabin that no longer felt like home. The following evening, Quinn returned to find fresh flowers already placed at Martha's grave, but no sign of Hannah Mercer. A curious mixture of disappointment and relief washed over him. He settled into his usual spot, removing his hat and running a hand through his dark hair, now streaked with premature gray at the temples. "You'd like her, Martha," he whispered. "She's got a kindness about her." The words felt like betrayal the moment they left his lips, and Quinn fell silent again, the weight of his grief pressing down on him anew. 3 days passed before he saw Hannah again. This time she arrived while he was already seated by the grave, a book in her hands. "Good evening, Mr. Yates," she said, kneeling to place another small bouquet of wildflowers. "I hope I'm not intruding." Quinn shook his head. "It's a public cemetery, madam." Hannah settled beside him, leaving a respectful distance between them. "I thought I might read aloud if you don't mind." "I often read to my James when he was ill, and somehow it comforts me to continue the practice." Before Quinn could respond, she opened the book, a well-worn copy of poetry. Her voice was clear and measured as she began to read, the words flowing over the quiet hillside like a gentle stream. Quinn found himself listening despite his determination to remain wrapped in his solitude, the familiar verses of Wordsworth and Keats painting pictures that momentarily lifted the heaviness from his heart. As the light began to fade, Hannah closed the book. "I should be going. Sheriff Turner was kind enough to escort me here, but I told him not to wait." Quinn frowned. "It's not safe for a lady to walk back to town alone at dusk." Hannah smiled faintly. "I've faced worse dangers, Mr. Yates." Something in her tone made Quinn look at her more closely. There was a resilience there beneath the genteel exterior. Still, he couldn't allow a woman to walk unescorted. "I'll see you back to town," he said, rising to his feet and placing his hat on his head. Hannah looked as if she might protest, then nodded. "Thank you." They walked in companionable silence, the distance between the cemetery and the small town of Silvercreek stretching before them. As they reached the edge of town, Hannah spoke. "I've taken a position at Mrs. Abernathy's boarding house, helping with the cooking and cleaning. If you ever tire of your own cooking, they serve a decent supper." Quinn hadn't eaten a proper meal since Martha's passing, subsisting on coffee, whiskey, and whatever he could throw together with minimal effort. The thought of sitting at a table with strangers making polite conversation made his stomach turn. "I do all right for myself," he said stiffly. Hannah didn't press the matter. When they reached the boarding house, a neat two-story building with lace curtains in the windows, she turned to him. "Thank you for the escort, Mr. Yates, and for allowing me to intrude on your grief." Quinn shifted uncomfortably under her direct gaze. "You're welcome to visit the cemetery whenever you like, Mrs. Mercer. I'm sure Martha appreciates the company." A small smile curved Hannah's lips. "Good night, then." Quinn tipped his hat and turned away, making his way not toward his lonely cabin on the outskirts of town, but to the Silvercreek saloon, where whiskey might dull the confusion that Hannah Mercer's presence had stirred within him. The saloon was busy that evening, miners and cowboys seeking solace in cards, women, and drink after long days of labor. Quinn found a quiet corner and ordered a bottle, intent on drinking alone. Sheriff Ben Turner spotted him and approached, pulling out a chair uninvited. "Evening, Quinn." "Surprised to see you in town." Quinn grunted in response, pouring a generous measure of whiskey. "I see you met the widow Mercer," Turner continued, undeterred by Quinn's lack of enthusiasm for conversation. "What brings her to Silvercreek?" Quinn asked despite himself. Turner shrugged. "Says she needed a fresh start. Her husband left her with some debts in Denver, from what I gather. She seems respectable enough. Mrs. Abernathy vouches for her, and that woman's got standards higher than the church steeple." Quinn nodded, absorbing this information as he sipped his whiskey. A widow seeking a new beginning wasn't unusual in these parts. The West was full of people running from something, be it the law, bad memories, or bad luck. "She visits the cemetery," Quinn said after a pause. "Her husband's buried in Denver, I believe. Perhaps tending to others' graves brings her comfort." Turner stood, clapping Quinn on the shoulder. "Good to see you among the living, Quinn. Martha wouldn't want you to fade away." The sheriff's words followed Quinn as he made his solitary way back to his cabin later that night, the whiskey having failed to numb the ache in his chest or quiet the thoughts of a woman with kind eyes and a gentle voice reading poetry over his wife's grave. The next day, Quinn didn't go to the cemetery at his usual time. Instead, he found himself standing outside Mrs. Abernathy's boarding house just as the dinner bell rang. Through the window, he could see figures moving about the dining room, and for a moment, he considered turning away. Then the door opened and Hannah Mercer stood framed in the light. "Mr. Yates," she said, surprise evident in her voice. "Were you coming for supper?" Quinn clutched his hat in his hands, suddenly feeling foolish. I thought I might if there's room. Hannah's smile was warm. There's always room. Mrs. Abernathy believes in feeding anyone who comes to her door. Please come in. The boarding house dining room was warm and bright, with a long table set for 12. Several of the town's residents were already seated: the schoolteacher, Miss Patterson, the young doctor, Simmons, a couple of clerks from the mercantile, and 3 traveling salesmen. Mrs. Abernathy, a stout woman with gray hair pulled into a severe bun, raised her eyebrows at the sight of Quinn, but gestured to an empty chair. Mr. Yates, what a pleasant surprise. Hannah, show him to a seat. Hannah led Quinn to a chair near the end of the table, then took the seat beside him. The proximity made Quinn acutely aware of the scent of lavender that clung to her clothes, and the way her hands moved gracefully as she unfolded her napkin. The meal was simple, but hearty: roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and apple pie for dessert. Quinn couldn't remember the last time he'd tasted food so good. As the others engaged in conversation around him, he ate quietly, occasionally glancing at Hannah, who seemed at ease among these people despite being new to town. After dinner, when the other boarders had retired to the parlor for coffee, Quinn found himself helping Hannah clear the table, a task he'd often done with Martha. "Thank you for coming," Hannah said as they worked. "I was worried about you when you didn't appear at the cemetery today." Quinn stacked plates with careful precision. "I had some work to attend to." It wasn't entirely a lie. He'd spent the day mending fences on his small ranch, forcing himself to complete tasks that had been neglected since Martha's passing. Physical labor had always been his refuge, and today it had served the additional purpose of keeping his mind from wandering to thoughts of Hannah Mercer. "What kind of work do you do, Mr. Yates?" Hannah asked. "I've got a small cattle ranch about 3 miles outside town." "Nothing fancy, but it's mine." Quinn paused. "Or it was ours." "Martha and mine," Hannah nodded, understanding in her eyes. "It must be difficult maintaining it alone." "I manage," Quinn said, though in truth the ranch had begun to suffer in the past month. His heart wasn't in it anymore. As they finished clearing the table, Mrs. Abernathy bustled in, shooing Quinn away. "You're a guest, Mr. Yates. Hannah and I can handle the washing up." Quinn replaced his hat. "Thank you for the meal, Mrs. Abernathy. It was good." The older woman's expression softened. "You're welcome anytime, Quinn. Martha was a dear friend, and I know she'd want you taken care of." Quinn nodded stiffly, unable to respond to the mention of Martha without the tightness returning to his chest. Hannah walked him to the door. "Will you be at the cemetery tomorrow?" she asked quietly. "I go every evening," Quinn replied. "Then perhaps I'll see you there." Hannah hesitated, then added, "I find your company comforting, Mr. Yates. I hope you don't mind my saying so." Quinn studied her face in the dim light of the porch lantern. There was no artifice there, no ulterior motive he could discern, just honest sentiment from a woman who understood loss. "I don't mind," he said finally. "Good night, Mrs. Mercer." As Quinn walked back through the quiet streets of Silvercreek, he realized that for the first time since Martha's death, he had spent an entire evening without the crushing weight of grief pressing down on him. The realization brought both relief and guilt in equal measure. True to his word, Quinn returned to the cemetery the following evening. Hannah was already there, seated beside Martha's grave with her book of poetry. She looked up as he approached, a smile warming her features. "Good evening, Mr. Yates. I've brought some marigolds today, Mrs. Abernathy said they were in season and might brighten things up a bit." Quinn settled beside her, removing his hat. "Martha liked bright colors. Our cabin was full of them: quilts she'd made, curtains, little paintings she'd done." Hannah's expression brightened at this rare personal detail. "She sounds like a woman who brought joy wherever she went." "She did," Quinn agreed, surprised at how easy it was to speak of Martha to Hannah. "We met when I was driving cattle through Kansas. She was the daughter of a shopkeeper in a little town called Oak Ridge. I stopped to buy supplies, saw her, and couldn't leave without speaking to her. 6 months later, we were married and heading west together. How long were you married? Hannah asked gently. 8 years, not nearly long enough. Quinn's voice roughened. We wanted children, but it never happened for us. Hannah nodded, her own eyes reflecting a similar pain. James and I were married 5 years. We had a daughter who lived just 3 days. After that, the doctor said there wouldn't be more children. Quinn felt a surge of empathy for this woman who had lost not only a husband but a child as well. I'm sorry, Mrs. Mercer. Hannah, please, she said. If we're to share our griefs, perhaps we might use our Christian names. Quinn nodded slowly. Hannah then, and I'm Quinn. Hannah smiled, then opened her book. Shall I read a while, Quinn? He nodded, settling back against a nearby tree as Hannah's voice filled the quiet cemetery with words of beauty and longing. As the sun set and stars began to appear overhead, Quinn found himself watching Hannah's profile, the way the fading light caught in her hair and illuminated her face as she read. When she finished, closing the book gently, Quinn spoke. My ranch needs attention. I've let things go since Martha passed. If you'd be willing, I could use some help getting the house in order. I'd pay you, of course. Hannah looked surprised but pleased. I'd be happy to help. Mrs. Abernathy has been kind enough to give me Thursdays off from my duties at the boarding house. Thursday then, Quinn said, rising to his feet. I'll come fetch you with the wagon if that suits. That would be fine. Hannah stood as well, brushing dirt from her skirts. And Quinn, thank you for trusting me with your memories of Martha. It honors her. Quinn swallowed hard, then offered his arm to escort Hannah back to town. As they walked, a comfortable silence between them, Quinn realized that for the first time in a month he was looking forward to tomorrow. Thursday dawned clear and cool, the first hints of autumn painting the aspen trees gold against the evergreen slopes of the surrounding mountains. Quinn rose early, spending an hour attempting to tidy the main room of the cabin before giving up. The place had fallen into disarray without Martha's touch, dishes piled in the sink, clothing strewn about, dust gathering on every surface. He hitched the wagon and drove into town, arriving at the boarding house just as Hannah emerged, wearing a simple brown dress with an apron already tied around her waist. She carried a basket covered with a cloth. Good morning, she called as Quinn helped her up onto the wagon seat. I hope you don't mind, but I've brought some things for lunch. That's thoughtful of you, Quinn said, taking the reins. I should warn you, the place is in a state. I haven't been much for housekeeping lately. Hannah's smile was understanding. I expected as much. Grief has a way of making the everyday tasks seem insurmountable. The drive to Quinn's ranch took them through rolling hills dotted with ponderosa pines and groves of aspen. As they crested a rise, Quinn's property came into view, a modest cabin with a barn and corral, a small herd of cattle grazing in a pasture beyond. It wasn't grand, but it was good land with a year-round creek running through it. It's lovely, Hannah said, taking in the view. Peaceful. Quinn nodded. Martha chose this spot, said she wanted to see the mountains from the front porch every morning. The cabin itself was sturdily built of logs with a stone chimney. A covered porch wrapped around two sides, though the flower boxes Martha had tended were now filled with dried and withered plants. Quinn helped Hannah down from the wagon, suddenly self-conscious about bringing her to this place that bore all the evidence of his inability to cope with his loss. I'll tend to the horses, he said. Make yourself at home. When Quinn entered the cabin 20 minutes later, he found Hannah had already rolled up her sleeves and set to work. She'd opened windows to let in fresh air and was in the process of sweeping the main room, having already cleared the table of clutter. I hope you don't mind my starting, she said. I thought we might begin with the kitchen and main room, then see what else needs attention. Quinn removed his hat, hanging it on a peg by the door. I appreciate your help. I haven't been able to bring myself to touch most of her things. Hannah nodded, understanding in her eyes. We'll go slowly. Some things you may want to keep just as they were, and that's all right. They worked together throughout the morning, Hannah tackling the kitchen while Quinn brought in firewood and cleared the porch. By midday, the main room was transformed, floors swept, furniture dusted, windows gleaming. Hannah had arranged Martha's collection of painted plates on a shelf, displaying them rather than leaving them packed in the box where Quinn had placed them after he couldn't bear to see them on the table anymore. "They're too beautiful to keep hidden away," Hannah explained when she saw Quinn staring at them. "But if you'd rather I put them back, I understand." Quinn shook his head. No, Martha would have wanted them seen. She was proud of those plates, painted each one herself. They ate lunch on the porch, sharing the bread, cheese, and apple tart Hannah had brought. Quinn found himself speaking more than he had in weeks, telling Hannah about the ranch, his plans for expanding the herd next spring, even some stories about his early days with Martha. "She couldn't cook worth a damn when we first married," he said with a faint smile. "First biscuits she made nearly broke my tooth, but she kept at it, determined to learn. By the time—" His voice faltered. "By the end, she could make a meal that would put most restaurant cooks to shame." Hannah listened attentively, occasionally sharing her own stories about life in Denver with James, who had been a clerk at a bank before illness took him. "He loved music," she said. "Couldn't play a note himself, but he'd save for months to take me to concerts. Said the look on my face when the orchestra played was worth every penny." After lunch, they turned their attention to the bedroom. Quinn hesitated at the doorway, having slept on a cot in the main room since Martha's passing. "We don't have to do this today," Hannah said gently. Quinn took a deep breath. "No, it's time, can't avoid it forever." The bedroom was just as Martha had left it, her hairbrush still on the dresser, a shawl draped over the chair by the window, a book open on the bedside table. Quinn stood in the center of the room, overwhelmed by the feeling of her presence. Hannah moved quietly around him, straightening the quilt on the bed, picking up the hairbrush. "What a beautiful brush. Silver?" Quinn nodded. "Wedding gift from her parents. She used it every night, 100 strokes before bed. Said her mother taught her that." Hannah placed the brush back carefully, exactly as it had been. "Perhaps this room just needs a bit of fresh air and the bed made up properly. The rest can stay as it is for now." Relief washed over Quinn. He wasn't ready to pack away Martha's things, to erase the evidence of her life from their home. Hannah seemed to understand this without him having to explain. By late afternoon, the cabin was transformed not by removing Martha's presence, but by restoring the order and cleanliness she had valued. Hannah had even found some late-blooming wildflowers to place in a jar on the table, bringing color back into the room. As they stood on the porch, surveying their work, Quinn felt a weight lift from his shoulders. "I can't thank you enough," he said. "It helps somehow, seeing the place cared for again." Hannah smiled, the setting sun casting a golden glow across her face. "I'm glad I could help. It's a fine home, Quinn. It deserves to be lived in properly." The ride back to town was quiet, both of them tired from the day's work but content in each other's company. As they approached the boarding house, Quinn found himself reluctant to say goodbye. "Would you care to join me at the cemetery tomorrow evening?" he asked. "I think Martha would like to know what we've done with the place." Hannah's smile was warm. "I'd like that very much." Over the next few weeks, a pattern emerged. Quinn would come to town for dinner at the boarding house 2 or 3 times a week, and Hannah would join him at the cemetery most evenings. Sometimes they would talk, sharing memories of their spouses or discussing the happenings in town. Other times, Hannah would read from her book of poetry or from a newspaper Quinn brought from the general store. October brought colder weather and the first dusting of snow to the mountains. Quinn found himself spending more time in town, finding excuses to visit the general store or the post office, places where he might catch a glimpse of Hannah as she went about her duties at the boarding house. On a particularly crisp Saturday, Quinn rode into town to find preparations underway for the Harvest Dance, an annual tradition in Silvercreek. Bunting was being hung outside the town hall, and a platform for musicians was under construction in the small square. Sheriff Turner spotted Quinn as he tied his horse to the hitching post outside the general store. "Quinn, Just the man I wanted to see. We're short-handed for setting up the dance. Could use an extra pair of strong arms." Quinn hesitated. He hadn't attended any social functions since Martha's passing, the thought of celebration still feeling wrong somehow. "I don't know, Ben. I'm not much for dances these days." Turner's expression softened. "I understand, but the whole town's pitching in. Even the widow Mercer is helping Mrs. Abernathy with the refreshments." At the mention of Hannah, Quinn's resolve wavered. "I suppose I could lend a hand with the heavy lifting." Turner clapped him on the shoulder. "That's the spirit. We're meeting at the town hall in an hour." When Quinn arrived at the town hall, the place was bustling with activity. Men were arranging tables and benches along the walls, while women hung fall decorations, dried corn husks, pumpkins, and colorful leaves strung together in garlands. Hannah was there, helping to cover tables with clean cloths. She looked up as Quinn entered, her face brightening. "Quinn, I didn't expect to see you here." "Sheriff Turner can be persuasive," Quinn said, removing his hat. "Said they needed help with the heavy work." Hannah smiled. "Well, I'm glad you came. Mrs. Abernathy has me making enough apple cider and pumpkin bread to feed an army." Quinn found himself assigned to helping construct a temporary stage for the musicians. The work was straightforward, and he appreciated having something physical to focus on. As he hammered and sawed, he occasionally glanced toward Hannah, watching as she moved about the hall with quiet efficiency. By late afternoon, the hall was transformed. Lanterns hung from the rafters, tables laden with food lined one wall, and the newly constructed stage awaited the small band that would provide music for the evening's festivities. As the workers began to disperse to prepare for the dance, Hannah approached Quinn, wiping her hands on her apron. "Will you be attending tonight?" she asked, a hint of hopefulness in her voice. Quinn hesitated. The thought of dancing, of enjoyment and celebration, still felt like a betrayal of Martha's memory. Yet the idea of seeing Hannah in a setting outside their usual meetings at the cemetery or her work at his ranch held an undeniable appeal. "I haven't been to a dance since." He trailed off. Hannah's expression was understanding. "It's difficult, the first time you participate in something joyful after loss. When I attended my first social gathering after James passed, I felt guilty for every smile, every laugh. But then I realized he wouldn't have wanted me to stop living." Quinn nodded slowly. "Martha loved to dance. Couldn't keep her off the floor once the music started. Then perhaps you might honor her by dancing tonight," Hannah suggested gently. "Just one dance." Quinn met her gaze, seeing in her eyes not pressure but a genuine desire for his well-being. "Perhaps I might," he said finally. "If you'd save a dance for me." Hannah's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "I'd be honored, Quinn." That evening, Quinn stood before the small mirror in his cabin, attempting to tame his hair and straighten his best shirt. He'd bathed in the creek, the water icy cold but invigorating, and shaved carefully, nicking himself only once in the process. As he prepared to leave, his eyes fell on Martha's silver hairbrush. On impulse, he picked it up, running his fingers over the intricate pattern on the back. "I'm going to a dance tonight, Martha," he said quietly. "With a friend. I think you'd like her." The ride into town was filled with a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. Quinn hadn't participated in any social function since the funeral, and the thought of making small talk and being the object of pitying glances made his stomach knot. But the image of Hannah's smile when he'd agreed to attend kept him moving forward. The town hall was aglow with lantern light, the sounds of fiddle music and laughter spilling out into the night. Quinn tied his horse at the hitching post, straightened his vest, and made his way inside. The hall was crowded, nearly everyone in Silvercreek having turned out for the annual event. Quinn nodded to acquaintances as he made his way through the throng, accepting condolences and well wishes with quiet dignity. He was searching the room for Hannah when Sheriff Turner appeared at his elbow, pressing a cup of cider into his hand. "Glad you came, Quinn. Does a man good to be among his neighbors." Quinn took a sip of the cider, the sweet tart flavor unexpectedly pleasant. Place looks nice. You all did a good job. Credit goes to the ladies for the decorating. We just provided the muscle, Turner grinned. Speaking of ladies, I believe Mrs. Mercer was looking for you earlier. Quinn's heart quickened. You seen her lately? Turner pointed toward the refreshment table. Last I saw, she was helping Mrs. Abernathy serve. Quinn made his way through the crowd, finally spotting Hannah distributing slices of pumpkin bread. She was dressed in a deep blue gown, simpler than what many of the town ladies wore but elegant in its simplicity. Her hair was arranged in a loose knot at the nape of her neck, a few tendrils framing her face. She looked up as he approached, her face lighting with pleasure. You came. Said I would, didn't I? Quinn managed a small smile. You look very nice, Hannah. A blush colored her cheeks. Thank you. Mrs. Abernathy insisted I wear one of her daughter's old gowns, said I couldn't serve refreshments in my everyday dress. It suits you, Quinn said, surprising himself with the compliment. Hannah's blush deepened. I'm nearly finished here. Perhaps we could sit for a while when I'm done, Quinn nodded, moving to stand near the wall as Hannah completed her duties. From this vantage point, he could observe the dancing without feeling obligated to participate. Couples whirled around the floor to a lively reel, faces flushed with exertion and enjoyment. A pang of memory struck him Martha, laughing as he swung her around at a similar dance years ago, her hair coming loose from its pins, her eyes bright with joy. The image didn't bring the usual wave of crushing grief, but rather a bittersweet warmth. Penny for your thoughts, Hannah said, appearing at his side. Just remembering, Quinn replied. Good memories, though. Hannah smiled, understanding in her eyes. Those are the best kind to hold on to. They found seats along the wall, watching the dancers as they talked. Hannah pointed out various townspeople, sharing small observations and stories she'd gathered during her time at the boarding house. Miss Patterson is sweet on Dr. Simmons, but he's too shy to notice, she confided. And Mr. Jenkins from the bank has proposed to the milliner's daughter 3 times, but she keeps refusing because she says he's too serious. Quinn found himself chuckling at her tales, amazed at how much Hannah had learned about the town in her short time there. You've made yourself at home here, he observed. Hannah's expression turned thoughtful. I suppose I have. Silvercreek reminds me of the town where I grew up, small enough that people know each other, but not so small that everyone's in each other's business constantly. The music changed to a slower waltz, and several couples left the floor while others joined in. Quinn watched as Sheriff Turner led Mrs. Abernathy onto the floor, the older woman protesting but clearly pleased. Would you care to dance, Hannah? Quinn asked suddenly, the words surprising him as much as they seemed to surprise her. Hannah's eyes widened slightly, then softened. I'd like that very much, Quinn. He led her onto the floor, placing one hand lightly at her waist while taking her other hand in his. It had been so long since he'd touched a woman this way, and the warmth of her beneath his palm was both foreign and comforting. They moved together with surprising ease, Quinn remembering the steps as if his body had stored the knowledge even when his mind had tried to forget. Hannah followed his lead gracefully, her skirts swirling around their feet as they turned. You dance very well, she said softly. Martha taught me, Quinn admitted. I had 2 left feet when we met. She said she wouldn't marry a man who couldn't dance at his own wedding, so I learned. Hannah smiled. She sounds like a woman who knew what she wanted. She was, Quinn agreed, the memory bringing warmth rather than pain. What about your James? Was he a dancing man? Oh yes, he loved to dance, though he wasn't particularly good at it. Stepped on my toes more often than not, but with such enthusiasm that I couldn't be upset. They laughed together, and Quinn realized with a start that it was the first time he'd truly laughed since Martha's passing. The realization must have shown on his face, for Hannah's expression turned questioning. Are you all right, Quinn? He nodded, tightening his hold on her waist slightly. Just realized something is all. Thank you for convincing me to come tonight. The music ended and they parted, Quinn feeling strangely bereft without Hannah's warmth beneath his hand. Before he could suggest another dance, Dr. Simmons approached, asking Hannah for the next set. She glanced at Quinn, who nodded his permission, then accepted the doctor's hand. Quinn retreated to the refreshment table where Sheriff Turner joined him, a knowing look in his eye. "The widow Mercer seems to be good for you," Turner observed, helping himself to a cup of cider. Quinn frowned slightly. "She's a friend, Ben, nothing more." Turner raised an eyebrow. "If you say so. Just observing that you look more like your old self tonight than you have in months." Quinn couldn't deny the truth in the sheriff's words. Something had shifted within him, a small crack appearing in the wall of grief he'd built around himself. And Hannah Mercer, with her gentle understanding and quiet strength, had somehow found her way through that crack. As the evening wore on, Quinn danced twice more with Hannah and once with Mrs. Abernathy, who declared him too handsome to waste the evening standing against the wall. He found himself enjoying the company of his neighbors, accepting their good wishes without the usual stab of pain that accompanied expressions of sympathy. When the musicians played their final tune, and people began to disperse, Quinn offered to walk Hannah back to the boarding house. The night was clear and cold, stars scattered like diamonds across the velvet sky. Their breath formed small clouds in the air as they walked, Hannah's arm tucked into Quinn's. "I enjoyed this evening more than I expected to," Quinn admitted as they reached the boarding house porch. Hannah smiled up at him, her face illuminated by the porch lantern. "I'm glad. It was good to see you among friends, Quinn." They stood in silence for a moment, neither seeming eager to part. Finally, Quinn spoke. "I was thinking of attending church tomorrow, haven't been since the funeral." "Might be time to go back." Hannah's expression brightened. "I'd be happy to save you a seat if you'd like." Quinn nodded. "I'd appreciate that." As he turned to leave, Hannah caught his hand. "Quinn," she said softly, "Martha would be proud of you for living." The words struck him like a physical blow, bringing an unexpected sting of tears to his eyes. He squeezed her hand once, unable to speak, then released it and walked away into the night, his heart both lighter and heavier than it had been in months. The following morning dawned clear and crisp, the kind of autumn day that hints at winter's approach while still clinging to fall's golden warmth. Quinn rose early, taking extra care with his appearance before riding into town for the Sunday service. The white clapboard church sat on a small hill overlooking Silvercreek, its spire reaching toward the heavens like a finger pointing the way. Quinn tied his horse to the hitching post and stood for a moment, steeling himself. The last time he'd entered this building had been for Martha's funeral, and the memory of that day was still sharp enough to cut. "Mr. Yates." "Good morning," called Reverend Williams, the young minister coming down the steps to greet him. "It's good to see you, sir." Quinn shook the offered hand. "Morning, Reverend. Thought it was time I came back." Williams nodded, understanding in his eyes. "The Lord welcomes you whenever you're ready, Quinn. No rush in these matters." Inside, the church was filling with Silvercreek's residents, all in their Sunday best. Quinn spotted Hannah near the front, wearing a modest gray dress with a touch of lace at the collar. She saw him hesitating in the doorway and motioned to the empty space beside her on the pew. As Quinn made his way down the aisle, he felt the weight of eyes upon him, some curious, others sympathetic. He focused on Hannah's welcoming smile, finding in it the strength to continue. "I'm glad you came," she whispered as he settled beside her. The service was simple but heartfelt, Reverend Williams speaking on themes of renewal and hope. Quinn found himself listening intently, the words touching something within him that had been dormant since Martha's passing. "In our darkest hours," Williams said, his young face earnest, "when we feel most alone, God sends us reminders of His love through the kindness of neighbors, the beauty of His creation, the unexpected friendship that lights our path when all seems lost." Quinn glanced at Hannah, finding her already looking at him, a faint blush coloring her cheeks when their eyes met. She quickly returned her attention to the Reverend, but the moment lingered between them like a whispered secret. After the service, many of the congregants gathered outside the church, exchanging news and pleasantries in the autumn sunshine. Quinn found himself drawn into conversation with neighbors he hadn't spoken to in months, accepting their good wishes with growing ease. "Will you be joining us for the communal lunch?" Hannah asked as the crowd began to disperse toward the tables set up beneath the trees behind the church. Quinn hesitated. He'd already pushed himself further than he'd thought possible by attending the dance and now church. The thought of making conversation over a meal seemed overwhelming. Seeing his reluctance, Hannah added softly, "We could take our plates and find a quiet spot if you'd prefer." The consideration in her offer touched him. "That sounds manageable," he agreed. They filled their plates with fried chicken, biscuits, and apple cobbler from the laden tables, then found a secluded bench beneath an old oak tree, slightly removed from the main gathering. The leaves above them were turning gold and red, occasionally drifting down to land on their shoulders or plates. "How are things at the ranch?" Hannah asked as they ate. Quinn considered the question. "Better. I've been keeping up with the work more regular-like. Even started fixing that loose board on the porch that's been bothering me for months." Hannah smiled. "That's good to hear. And the cattle, doing well enough. Need to bring them in closer to the barn soon with winter coming on." Quinn paused, then added, "I was thinking of hiring on some help. Ranch is too much for one man, especially with the plans I have for expanding next spring." "That sounds sensible," Hannah agreed. "Do you have someone in mind?" Quinn nodded. "Young fellow named Tate Johnson. Good with horses, worked for the Peterson spread until they sold out last year. Been doing odd jobs around town since then." They continued talking, the conversation flowing easily between them. Quinn found himself speaking of his plans for the future, expanding the herd, adding a room to the cabin, perhaps planting an orchard on the south-facing slope where Martha had always said apple trees would thrive. It struck him suddenly that he was thinking beyond the next day for the first time since her death, making plans that extended months and even years into the future. The realization was both startling and comforting. As they were preparing to leave, Reverend Williams approached, his young face earnest. "Quinn, Hannah, I'm glad to catch you both. I wanted to let you know that we're organizing a cleanup of the cemetery next Saturday. The first snow could come any day now, and we want to make sure all the graves are tended before winter sets in." Quinn nodded. "I'll be there, Reverend." "Me as well," Hannah added. "I've been meaning to clear away some of the summer growth around several of the plots." Williams smiled. "Wonderful. We'll begin at 9 in the morning, and Quinn, it truly is good to have you back with us." As the Reverend moved away to speak with other parishioners, Quinn turned to Hannah. "Would you care to join me at the cemetery this evening, our usual time?" Hannah's smile was warm. "I wouldn't miss it." That evening, as the sun began its descent behind the mountains, Quinn and Hannah sat side by side at Martha's grave. Quinn had brought a blanket for them to sit on, the ground having grown cold with the approach of winter. "I've been thinking," Quinn said after they had sat in companionable silence for a while. "Martha's birthday is coming up next month, November 15th. She would have been 33, Hannah nodded, waiting for him to continue. "I'd like to do something to mark the day. Not just sitting here, but something, I don't know, something that celebrates who she was." "What did Martha love besides you?" Hannah asked gently. Quinn considered the question. "Music, painting, children, though we never had our own. She used to teach the town children songs and games sometimes when they'd visit the ranch. Perhaps we could organize something at the school," Hannah suggested. "A day of music and art for the children in her memory." The idea resonated with Quinn immediately. She would have liked that. "Very much," Hannah smiled. "Then that's what we'll do. I'll speak with Miss Patterson about using the schoolhouse." As darkness fell, they walked back to town together, making plans for Martha's birthday celebration. For the first time, Quinn found that thinking of ways to honor Martha's memory brought more comfort than pain. The following Saturday, the cemetery cleanup brought out most of Silvercreek's residents. Armed with rakes, shears, and burlap sacks, they set to work clearing away dead flowers, trimming overgrown grass and straightening markers that had shifted in the soil. Quinn focused his attention on Martha's grave and those surrounding it, while Hannah worked nearby, singing softly to herself as she cleared debris from the plot of a child who had died of fever the previous winter. By midday, the cemetery was transformed neat, tidy, and ready for the coming snow. As the workers gathered their tools preparing to return to town, Quinn found himself standing once more before Martha's cross. "We've taken good care of her," Hannah said, coming to stand beside him. Quinn nodded, emotion tightening his throat. "She would appreciate it." Martha always liked things neat and orderly. Hannah hesitated, then reached for his hand, her fingers warm against his. She was fortunate to have someone who loved her so well, Quinn. Quinn looked down at their joined hands, then back to Martha's grave. "I was the fortunate one," he said softly. Then, after a moment, he added, "But I'm beginning to think that perhaps a man might be fortunate twice in his life." Hannah's fingers tightened around his, and they stood together in silence as the autumn sun bathed the cemetery in golden light. The weeks that followed brought a comfortable routine. Quinn attended church each Sunday, sitting beside Hannah, and often joined her and the other boarders for Sunday lunch. They continued their evening visits to the cemetery, though as the weather grew colder, these visits became shorter and less frequent. Instead, Quinn found himself inviting Hannah to the ranch more often. She would come on her days off, helping him put the place in order for winter, preserving the last of the garden's produce, mending curtains and quilts, organizing the pantry. Sometimes Tate Johnson, the young man Quinn had hired to help with the ranch, would join them for supper, his easy conversation and youthful energy bringing life to the cabin that had been silent for too long. As November 15th approached, preparations for Martha's birthday celebration intensified. Miss Patterson had enthusiastically embraced the idea of a day of music and art at the school, and children were practicing songs and creating drawings to display. The day before the event, Quinn and Hannah were at the ranch, preparing food for the celebration. Hannah was baking Martha's favorite apple cake from a recipe Quinn had found tucked in a cookbook, while Quinn cleaned and polished Martha's silver hairbrush, planning to display it along with some of her paintings at the schoolhouse. "You think she would have approved?" Quinn asked suddenly, the question that had been weighing on his mind finally finding voice. "Of us, of how things are between us." Hannah paused in her work, flour dusting her hands and a smudge of it on her cheek. "What do you mean, Quinn?" Quinn set the hairbrush down carefully. "I mean us spending time together. Me, moving forward with my life." Hannah's expression softened. "From everything you've told me about Martha, she sounds like a woman who loved life and who loved you deeply. I can't imagine she would want you to spend the rest of your days in sorrow." "And what about James?" Quinn asked. "Would he have understood?" Hannah was quiet for a moment, her hands resuming their work kneading dough. "James told me something before he died. He said, 'Hannah, you have too much love in your heart to keep it locked away. Promise me you won't.'" Her voice caught slightly. "I think both Martha and James would want us to find whatever happiness we can in this life, Quinn." Quinn moved to stand beside her at the table, gently turning her to face him. With a careful touch, he brushed the smudge of flour from her cheek. "You've brought light back into my life, Hannah. I didn't think that was possible." Hannah's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "And you've given me a place to belong again. I came to Silvercreek lost and alone, and now—" "And now," Quinn prompted softly when she didn't continue. "And now I can't imagine being anywhere else," she finished, her voice barely above a whisper. Quinn's hand cupped her cheek, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheekbone. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a gentle kiss. Hannah's hands, still dusted with flour, came to rest on his chest as she returned the kiss, the sweetness of it bringing an ache to Quinn's heart, not of pain, but of renewed hope. When they parted, Quinn rested his forehead against hers. "I'm not trying to replace what was lost," he said quietly. "Martha will always be part of me, as James will always be part of me," Hannah replied. But perhaps there's room in our hearts for new love alongside the memories of those we've lost. Quinn nodded, then kissed her once more before reluctantly stepping back. We should finish these preparations if we want to be ready for tomorrow. They worked together through the afternoon, the air between them charged with new awareness but also comfortable, as if they had crossed a threshold that had been waiting for them all along. The next day, Martha's birthday celebration at the schoolhouse was a joyous occasion. Children sang songs and displayed artwork, many of them incorporating the bright colors Martha had loved. Quinn had brought several of her paintings to show, and Hannah had arranged them on easels borrowed from a traveling artist who was staying at the boarding house. In the center of the display stood Martha's silver hairbrush, gleaming in the November sunlight that streamed through the schoolhouse windows. Beside it, Hannah had placed a vase of dried flowers, the last blooms from Martha's garden, preserved for the occasion. As Quinn watched the children playing games that Martha had taught them, Hannah came to stand beside him, slipping her hand into his. "She would have loved this," she said quietly. Quinn nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "Yes, she would have." Later, as the celebration was winding down, Reverend Williams approached them. "This was a beautiful tribute, Quinn, a way of keeping Martha's spirit alive in the community." "It was Hannah's idea," Quinn said, giving her hand a gentle squeeze. Williams smiled at them both. "The Lord works in mysterious ways. Sometimes He brings people into our lives precisely when we need them most." That evening, after they had cleaned up the schoolhouse and returned to the ranch, Quinn and Hannah sat on the porch despite the chill in the air, wrapped in blankets and watching as the first snowflakes of the season began to fall. "I've been thinking," Quinn said, his arm around Hannah's shoulders. "Would you consider coming to live here? Not right away," he added quickly, "but someday, when it feels right." Hannah turned to look at him, snowflakes catching in her eyelashes. "Are you asking what I think you're asking, Quinn Yates?" Quinn smiled, feeling a certainty he hadn't expected. "I suppose I am, in a roundabout way. I love you, Hannah. It snuck up on me, but there it is. And if you need time, I don't," Hannah interrupted, her eyes shining. "I love you too, Quinn. I think perhaps I have for some time now." Quinn pulled her closer, kissing her as snowflakes swirled around them, the world growing quiet beneath winter's first blanket. When they parted, he said, "It won't always be easy. We both carry our pasts with us." "The best things rarely are easy," Hannah replied, "but we'll face whatever comes together." Winter settled over Silvercreek in earnest, the days growing shorter and the nights colder. Quinn and Hannah's courtship continued, observed with approval by the townspeople who had watched Quinn's gradual return to life with collective relief. They were married on New Year's Day, 1879, in the small white church on the hill. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, with most of the town in attendance. Sheriff Turner stood as Quinn's best man, while Mrs. Abernathy, who had become like a mother to Hannah, gave her away. As they exchanged vows, Quinn felt Martha's presence not as a shadow over the proceedings, but as a gentle blessing. He had placed her silver hairbrush in Hannah's hands that morning, saying, "She would have wanted you to have this, a connection between past and present." Hannah had accepted the gift with tears in her eyes, understanding its significance. She wore it in her hair for the ceremony, the silver catching the winter sunlight that streamed through the church windows. After the wedding, they rode to the cemetery before joining their guests at the reception. Standing together before Martha's grave, now covered in snow, Quinn placed a small bouquet of hothouse flowers, a luxury he had ordered specially from Denver. "Thank you," he whispered to the wooden cross. "For the time we had and for watching over me after. I think you would approve of Hannah." "She has your kindness." Hannah knelt, brushing snow from the base of the cross. "I'll take care of him," she promised softly, "and we'll keep your memory alive." As they rose to leave, Hannah took Quinn's hand. "Should we visit James's grave in Denver sometime?" "I'd like you to know him in some small way," Quinn nodded. "Come spring, we'll make the journey." They returned to the ranch that evening as husband and wife, the cabin warm and welcoming against the winter chill. Quinn carried Hannah across the threshold, both of them laughing as he nearly slipped on the icy porch. Inside, the home that had once been filled with grief now glowed with renewed purpose. They had spent the week before the wedding rearranging furniture and adding touches that reflected both Martha's presence and Hannah's new place in the home. Martha's paintings still hung on the walls, but Hannah's books now filled a shelf Quinn had built for her. The quilt Martha had made still covered their bed, but the curtains were new ones Hannah had sewn. That night, as they lay together in the quiet darkness, Quinn whispered, "I never thought I would feel this way again, complete. Thank you for finding me, Hannah." Hannah's fingers traced the line of his jaw. "Perhaps we found each other, two broken pieces that somehow fit together." "Not broken," Quinn corrected gently. "Just unfinished until now." Spring came early to Silvercreek that year, the snow melting to reveal tender green shoots pushing through the softening earth. Quinn and Hannah made their promised journey to Denver, visiting James's grave in the city cemetery. Quinn placed a hand on the stone marker, silently thanking the man who had loved Hannah before him and whose memory she still honored. Upon their return, they threw themselves into the work of the ranch. With Tate Johnson's help, Quinn expanded the herd as planned, while Hannah planted an extensive garden, including the apple orchard on the south-facing slope that Martha had always envisioned. "It will be years before we see proper fruit," Quinn observed as they planted the saplings. Hannah smiled, her hands working the soil. "Then we'll just have to stick around to see it, won't we?" In the autumn of that year, Hannah discovered she was expecting a child. The news brought both joy and anxiety, her previous experience with motherhood having ended in heartbreak. But Quinn's steady presence and the support of the town's women, particularly Mrs. Abernathy and the young doctor's new wife, formerly Miss Patterson, carried her through the months of waiting. On a warm June morning in 1880, Hannah gave birth to a daughter, strong, lunged, and healthy. They named her Martha Rose, honoring the past while embracing their future. As Quinn held his daughter for the first time, he carried her to the window, showing her the world that awaited her. "Your mama would have loved you," he whispered. "Both of them." Hannah watched from the bed, exhausted but radiant. "She has your eyes," she observed as Quinn brought the baby back to her. "And your spirit, I'd wager," Quinn replied, settling beside them on the bed, strong and determined. That evening, when Hannah was resting, Quinn took his daughter to the porch, sitting in the rocking chair Hannah had insisted they needed months ago. As the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Quinn told his daughter about the woman whose name she carried. "She loved this view," he said softly, "and these mountains and this land. She helped make this place a home just as your mama does now, and you will too, little one, in your own way." The years that followed brought more children, twin boys, James and Benjamin, born in 1882, and another daughter, Elizabeth, in 1885. The ranch prospered, the apple orchard eventually bearing fruits sweet enough to win prizes at the county fair. Quinn and Hannah continued their tradition of visiting the cemetery, though less frequently as their family and responsibilities grew. They brought their children with them as they grew old enough to understand, teaching them about the people who had loved them from beyond this world. "Is it strange?" Hannah asked one evening as they sat on the porch, watching their children play in the yard, "that I sometimes feel as though Martha and James are still part of our family?" Quinn shook his head. "Not strange at all. They are part of who we are, part of what brought us together." "Do you ever wonder what might have been if they had lived?" Hannah asked, her voice thoughtful. Quinn considered the question. "Sometimes. But then I look at our children, at the life we've built, and I can only believe that this is how it was meant to be, not the losses we suffered, but the love we found afterward." Hannah leaned against his shoulder. "The first time I saw you at the cemetery, so still and silent beside her grave, I almost didn't approach you, but something told me to place those flowers, to stay." "I'm grateful you did," Quinn said, kissing the top of her head. "Every day I'm grateful." As twilight deepened around them, their children's laughter filling the air, Quinn and Hannah sat together on the porch of the home they had built from the foundations of loss, and hope a quiet cowboy who had once sat alone at his wife's grave, and the woman who had placed flowers beside him and stayed.